Whether or not Barack Obama is your president, or as the case is for me, another country's leader, most of you, I suspect, watched his inaugural speech with great rapt interest and attention. It was certainly a lovely and motivating and inspiring speech. I cried several times, even though guys apparently aren't supposed to do that. And I suspect each of you, each listener to that speech, took away something that was unique and special to them about what the new president, had to say. I did as well, and for me, one particular sentence absolutely grabbed me and riveted me. It was one of those hair standing up on the back of your neck moments. And I quote him, "As for our common defense, we reject as false the choice between our safety and our ideals." Now I studied, yeah, not bad. Not bad at all. I study and write about leadership, one of the things I care about, which of course makes it a great privilege to be here in a room with so many fantastic leaders. And in my study of highly successful leaders across all sorts of organizations, I studied them across all sorts of public, private sector organizations, I found the most common theme across all of these leaders, the most universal characteristic, to be a form of thinking that's exemplified by President Obama's sentence. We reject as false the choice between our safety and our ideals. That common theme is that when highly successful leaders are faced with an apparent choice between two or more opposing and unsatisfactory options, they show both the inclination to refuse to choose and the capacity to instead engineer a course of action that's superior to each of the apparent options. So President Obama, I think, pointed clearly to the apparent choice between our safety on one hand and our ideals on the other. Now, if you're an American president living still within the shadow of the worst terrorist attack in American history, it is a tough choice. A tough choice that a tough leader would make, right? Well, yes, most leaders would make that choice. Most leaders would. Consider another world leader on September 20th, 2001, 11 days after the terrorist attack on the World Trade Center, and his words, "Every nation, every region now has the decision to make. Either you are with us or you are with the terrorists." Now, admittedly, this is probably a bit of a cheap shot. We don't know yet whether Obama will be a great president. We all hope he will. And we have had 8 years to watch and judge the presidency of George W. Bush. But for the sake of illustration, the contrast could not be starker. On one hand, choice is the only possibility. On the other hand, we reject as false the choice. Now, as a Canadian, I didn't particularly appreciate George W. Bush's choice. We Canadians decidedly were not and are not with the terrorists, but we chose not to join the USA in Iraq. But we are with the USA, I think, more than any country in the world. We love the USA. We share with our friends the longest undefended border in the world and have the greatest bilateral flow of goods and people cumulatively in the history of the world. We weren't with the USA on Iraq or with the terrorists, nor were many of the countries represented by the people in this room. So to return to the leadership question, the statement, "We reject as false the choice between our safety and our ideals," is characteristic not of the thinking of leaders generally, but rather of great leaders. In my work, I found that great leaders harness the inherent power in the tension between these opposing ideas, options or models, and use that tension to forge a better model. And that, to me, is the power of paradox. At first blush, the opposing models appear to be a big problem, a problem you wish you didn't have. The choice between a rock and a hard place, the choice between the devil and the deep blue sea. But in fact, opposing models contain the seeds of a better answer, but only for those who seize the power of that paradox. Successful social entrepreneurs do just that, and I talked about them in my book. Victoria Hale, for example, did. The world saw there as being two opposing models for alienating suffering and disease through pharmaceuticals. The first model, the big pharma model, involved spending billions to fund cures for diseases. But those diseases had to be suffered by people who could afford to pay, or the pharma company just couldn't afford to make those big investments and earn a return on it. That meant this model left behind the diseases afflicting mainly poor people. The other model was the public health model. Pressured the big pharma companies to give their drugs away for free or at marginal cost to sufferers in developing countries who couldn't afford to pay. It worked as well, but didn't provide an avenue for drugs that didn't exist. Those aimed, again, at diseases primarily suffered by the poor. Those were the available models, and choosing between those available models meant accepting a very unpleasant trade-off where people would continue to suffer and die. Victoria Hale, as I think we all know, didn't choose, and that's why she's a former Skoll Award for Social Entrepreneurship winner and MacArthur Fellow. In the face of those two and only two available models, she said, no, there's a better model, a model inspired by the very best of big pharma and public health models. She needed to combine the research expertise of the big pharma model with the collaborative field-based capabilities of the public health organizations into one combined model. That was the creation of the Institute for One World Health, the world's first nonprofit pharmaceutical company. Victoria herself, in talking to me, called it the combination of oil and water. But that is what made it wonderful. And it has been particularly gratifying for the sufferers of the pernicious killer of the poorest of the poor, black fever, who have now a low-cost cure thanks to the Institute for One World Health and a new-to-the-world model. Or we could point to Victoria's fellow Skoll Award winner, Mindy Lubber. She wanted to help reverse the degradation of the environment. Like Victoria, she faced two entrenched models. The classic business first model, the business of business is business. Investors need profit, and profits first and foremost. Versus the classic civil society model. Promotes societal and environmental goals over profitability. What should Mindy have chosen? Well, the answer is neither. She took the best of the business model, reached out to the richest and most powerful of all, the mega investors like Goldman Sachs and CalPERS, and convinced them and 70 other institutional investors to join the Investors Network on Climate Risk as allies in the civil society cause. Today, those institutional investors represent more than $7 trillion in assets. More importantly, they are insisting that the companies in which they invest must disclose their climate risk exposure. And beyond integrating that discipline into their investment due diligence, these investors are now well on their way to becoming activists themselves. So there was no choice, rather a better answer.